My name is Alara Finch. Before I became Alara Hayes, I was just Alara, a girl who grew up in the salty air of a small coastal town, raised by a man who taught me that strength was found not in a loud voice, but in a steady heart. My father, Captain Alastair Finch, spent 30 years in the Navy, a man whose quiet authority could calm a stormy sea or a frightened child with equal ease. He smelled of sea salt and old books, and he believed that the most important navigation in life was charting a course of integrity. I carried that belief with me to the city, to nursing school, and into my work at Evergreen Community Hospital, where I found my calling in the hushed, hopeful chaos of the pediatric ward. It was in the city, a place of gleaming towers and hurried footsteps, that I met Julian Hayes. He was a rising star at the prestigious financial firm, Sterling Price, a man who moved through the world with an effortless charm that seemed to promise a life of sunlit certainty. He was handsome, ambitious, and when he looked at me, I felt like the only person in a crowded room. He saw, he said, a gentleness and a strength in me that grounded him. I, in turn, saw a future I'd only read about in novels, one of elegant dinner parties, shared dreams, and a love that felt both safe and exciting. We married on a perfect autumn day. The city skyline was a hazy purple behind us, and I felt a joy so profound it was almost painful. "I'm going to take such good care of you, Alara," Julian whispered, his hand warm in mine. I believed him with every fiber of my being. I believed in the beautiful home he bought for us, a sleek, modern house in a manicured suburb that his mother, Beatrice, had helped select. I believed in the family I was marrying into, his poised, elegant mother and his coolly sophisticated sister, Chloe. I believed I was the luckiest woman in the world. But belief is a fragile thing. It can be eroded so slowly you don't even notice the ground giving way beneath your feet. It happens in the quiet moments, in the subtle shifts of tone, in the words left unsaid. It begins not with a shout, but with a whisper of doubt, a seed planted in the fertile ground of love and trust, which, if untended, grows into a thicket of thorns. The first tremor came about 6 months into our marriage, over something as trivial as a set of bookshelves. I had spent a weekend in my father's garage, sanding and staining old pine boards, crafting a simple, rustic bookcase for our living room. It was a piece of my history, a small anchor of my coastal, handmade past in this new, polished world. I was filled with a quiet pride as I arranged my collection of worn paperbacks, the books my father and I had read together over the years. Julian came home, saw the bookcase, and smiled a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Oh, that's rustic, isn't it?" he said, running a hand over the smooth wood. "It's a lovely thought, Alara." "Really?" The next day, while I was at the hospital, Beatrice arrived. I came home from a long shift to find my beautiful, handmade bookcase gone. In its place stood a sterile, glass and chrome shelving unit. My beloved paperbacks were stacked neatly in a cardboard box on the floor. Beatrice had the most wonderful idea, Julian announced, his voice bright with manufactured enthusiasm. "She found this piece that just elevates the entire room. It's so much more in line with the aesthetic we're building. Isn't it incredible?" I stared at the box of my books, the scent of my father's workshop replaced by the cold, metallic smell of the new furniture. Where's the one I made?" I asked, my voice small. "Oh, darling," Beatrice said, stepping out from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a linen towel. She had that perfectly smooth, placid expression she wore when she was about to deliver a particularly sharp critique. "That old thing? It was sweet, but so dreadfully provincial. It simply didn't belong in a home like this. I had the handyman take it to the dump. You don't mind, do you? This is so much more appropriate for a man in Julian's position." I looked at Julian, waiting for him to defend me, to defend the thing I had made with my own hands, my own heart. He just squeezed my shoulder. "Mom's right, Alara. It looks a million times better. We should be grateful she has such good taste." Grateful. I was supposed to be grateful that a piece of me had been judged, found wanting, and discarded like trash. I didn't argue. I swallowed the lump in my throat, unpacked my books onto the cold glass shelves, and told myself that this was what compromise felt like. This was marriage. The erosion continued. My cooking was simple and quaint, so Beatrice took over planning our dinner parties. My clothes were a little too practical for the wife of a Sterling Price executive, so Chloe took me on educational, shopping trips, filling my closet with expensive, uncomfortable fabrics in muted tones that weren't me. My desire to pick up extra shifts in the pediatric oncology ward was met with a firm but gentle refusal from Julian. "My wife doesn't need to work weekends, darling," he'd said, not looking up from his laptop. "What would people think? That I can't provide for you?" "It's not about the money, Julian. I love my job. That unit needs experienced nurses. And I need you here, supporting me. My career is in a critical phase. That has to be our priority." So I rearranged my schedule. I turned down opportunities. I made his needs, his career, his family's expectations my priority. I told myself this was love. But late at night, lying beside him in the king-sized bed in our perfectly curated bedroom, a room that felt more like a hotel than a home, I would stare at the ceiling and feel a profound and nameless loneliness. I was becoming a ghost in my own life, my edges blurring, my colors fading, until I was just a pale reflection of the woman Julian and his family wanted me to be. The quiet, reflective woman my father had raised was learning to be silent. The nurse who advocated fiercely for her small patients forgot how to advocate for herself. And the most dangerous part was, I was starting to believe them. I was starting to believe that I was the problem, that I was the one who was lacking, the one who needed to be fixed. The evening of the dinner party felt charged with a familiar, low-grade anxiety. Julian had been on edge for weeks. A senior partnership at Sterling Price was on the line, and tonight's dinner with Arthur Davenport, the firm's managing partner, and his wife, Eleanor, was meant to be the final, unofficial interview. "The silver is smudged, Alara," Beatrice murmured, gliding past me in the dining room and picking up a fork to polish it with a napkin. Attention to detail is everything. Arthur Davenport notices everything. "The flowers are a bit funereal, don't you think?" Chloe commented from the doorway, scrolling through her phone. "A bit. Hospital waiting room." I had chosen simple white hydrangeas, remembering my mother, who had loved them. I took a deep breath, the scent of the flowers mingling with the rosemary from the roasting lamb, and forced a smile. "I think they're calming." Chloe just raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow and went back to her phone. Julian appeared, adjusting the knot of his silk tie. He looked impeccable, his ambition tailored into the very fabric of his suit. He placed his hands on my shoulders, his grip a little too tight. It was a gesture that might have looked affectionate to an outsider, but I recognized it for what it was, a warning. "Everything is perfect, isn't it?" he said, his voice a low command. "No surprises tonight, Alara. You know how much this means to me. Just be charming, agree with me, and let me handle the conversation. Don't embarrass me," was what he meant. The words hung in the air, unspoken but deafening. When the Davenports arrived, I felt a flicker of my old self. Arthur was a distinguished man with a warm handshake, but it was his wife, Eleanor, who immediately put me at ease. She had kind, intelligent eyes that seemed to see past the carefully constructed facade of our home and the tense smile on my face. Dinner was a masterclass in practiced conversation. Julian was at his most charming, guiding the discussion from market trends to his latest successful portfolio. I played my part, smiling and nodding, a silent, supportive prop. Then, over dessert, Eleanor turned to me. "Julian mentioned you're a pediatric nurse, Alara. My niece just finished her residency in pediatrics. It must be such incredibly demanding, meaningful work." For the first time all evening, a question was directed at me, not as Julian's wife, but as Alara Finch. I felt a spark of life ignite in my chest. "It is," I said, my voice sounding rusty from disuse. "It's challenging, of course, but the children, they have a resilience that's just breathtaking." "Alara is being modest," Julian cut in smoothly, with a little laugh. "She mostly handles the day-to-day comforts. A very nurturing role." The words were a subtle dismissal, reducing my years of training, my specialized skills in oncology care, my ability to manage complex 4 medications and comfort families at their lowest ebb, to little more than fluffing pillows. But Eleanor didn't let it go. She leaned forward, her expression genuinely curious. I'm sure it's far more than that. My niece says the emotional intelligence required is off the charts. How do you handle it when a family gets bad news? Before I could answer, I felt a pressure on my knee. Julian's hand under the table, a gentle but firm squeeze. The signal was clear, stop. But looking into Eleanor Davenport's kind eyes, I found a courage I thought I had lost. I ignored the pressure on my knee. You learn to hold space for their grief, I said, my voice gaining strength. You don't try to fix it. You just sit with them in the darkness for a while. And you focus on the small victories. Last week, a little boy, Leo, who's been with us for months, finally got to ring the bell signifying the end of his chemo. For that one moment, the whole ward wasn't about sickness. It was about pure, unadulterated joy. That's what you hold on to. A silence fell over the table, but it wasn't an awkward one. It was thoughtful. That's a beautiful way to put it, Arthur Davenport said, his gaze fixed on me with a newfound respect. That kind of perspective, that's leadership, young lady. The ability to find the light in the dark. I felt a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the wine. It was the warmth of being seen. Truly seen. For a moment, I wasn't Julian's wife or Beatrice's project. I was Alara Finch, a damn good nurse. I glanced at Julian. The charming smile was gone, replaced by a tight, cold mask. His eyes were like chips of ice. And in that moment, I knew that for every inch of myself I had reclaimed at that dinner table, I would pay a heavy price later. The front door had barely clicked shut behind the Davenports when the atmosphere in the house turned venomous. The fragile veneer of civility shattered. What exactly was that? Julian's voice was dangerously quiet, a tone I had learned to fear more than any shout. What was what? I asked, my hands trembling as I began to clear the plates. Don't play dumb, Alara. He followed me into the kitchen. That little performance at the table. Holding space for their grief. Pure, unadulterated joy. Who do you think you are, some kind of poet laureate of the sick ward? From the living room, Beatrice's sharp voice cut through the air. I thought it was terribly self-aggrandizing, Julian. She completely monopolized the conversation. Tonight was supposed to be about you. She made it all about her as usual, Chloe added, her voice bored but laced with malice. It was embarrassing. I stopped, my back to them, clutching a stack of porcelain plates. The weight of them felt like the weight of the last 3 years. I was answering a direct question, I said, turning slowly to face them. Eleanor was interested. Eleanor was being polite. Julian snapped, his face flushed. And you used it as a platform to make yourself sound like some kind of saint. You made me look like I don't appreciate my own wife in front of my boss. The injustice of it was staggering. You don't appreciate me, I said, the words coming out in a whisper. You diminish me. You told them I just fluff pillows. It was a figure of speech. My God, can't you for once just understand what's required of you? Your place is to support me, to make me look good. Not to steal the spotlight with your sad little hospital stories. My place? The phrase landed in the room like a grenade. My place is not to have a thought, a career, a single story of my own that might accidentally outshine you for 5 seconds. Now you're just being hysterical. Beatrice sighed from her armchair, swirling the wine in her glass. You've always been a bit too emotional, Alara. No, I said, my voice trembling but clear. I'm not. I'm finally getting angry. For 3 years, I have done nothing but support you. I have made myself smaller and smaller to fit into the tiny box you all built for me. I gave up shifts I loved. I let you throw away things I treasured. I have smiled and nodded while you belittled my life's work. And tonight, for one brief moment, I remembered who I was. And you can't stand it. I can't stand your disrespect. Julian took a step toward me, his body rigid with fury. You deliberately undermined me tonight. You chose your ego over our future. No, Julian, I said, setting the plates down on the counter with a loud clatter. You made the choice. You chose to be threatened by me instead of being proud of me. You chose to side with their cruelty instead of standing up for your wife. You have never, not once, stood up for me. How dare you, he breathed, his face contorting with a rage I had never seen so nakedly before. After everything I've given you? This house? This life? This is not a life. The shout ripped from my throat, raw and painful. It's a cage. A beautiful, expensive cage, but I am suffocating in it. Then maybe you need a reminder of just how good you have it, he snarled. He moved so fast I didn't have time to react. His hand came up, and the slap echoed through the pristine, silent living room like a gunshot. My cheek exploded with a white-hot pain. The shock was so profound, it stole my breath. Tears I had learned to swallow for years flooded my eyes. The silence that followed was broken by a sound that was far more painful than the slap itself. It was Beatrice's dry, satisfied chuckle. "Well," she said, taking a delicate sip of her wine. "It's about time someone put her in her place." Chloe snickered behind her hand. Honestly, she had it coming. I stood frozen, my hand pressed to my burning cheek, tasting the metallic tang of blood where my teeth had cut the inside of my mouth. I looked at the three of them, Julian, flexing his fingers as if to shake off the impact, his face a mask of cold satisfaction, Beatrice, watching me with a victor's gleam in her eye, Chloe, smirking down at her phone. The humiliation was a physical poison, seeping into my very bones. In that moment, something inside me broke. Or maybe it was finally pieced back together. The fog of confusion and self-doubt that had clouded my mind for 3 years finally burned away, leaving behind a terrible, searing clarity. None of them heard the front door open. The sound was too quiet, too discreet. They didn't notice the measured footsteps crossing the marble entryway. But I did. I turned my head, my tear-streaked face still throbbing, just as my father stepped into the archway of the living room. Captain Alistair Finch. He wasn't in uniform. He was in a simple tweed jacket and trousers, but he carried with him an aura of unshakable command that made the air in the room crackle. Behind him stood another man, older, with sharp eyes and a leather briefcase, a man I recognized as Marcus Thorne, my father's oldest friend and a formidable maritime lawyer. My father's steel-gray eyes, the eyes that had taught me to navigate by the stars, took in the scene in a single, sweeping glance. He saw my tears. He saw my red, swelling cheek. He saw Julian's still-clenched fist. His expression didn't change, not a single muscle in his face moved, but the atmosphere in the room dropped 20 degrees. The cruel laughter died in Beatrice's throat. Julian's smirk froze and then melted away, replaced by a look of dawning horror. My father's gaze finally settled on Julian. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, calm, and more chilling than any roar could ever be. "Julian," he said, the single word cutting through the silence like a shard of ice. "I believe you've just made a tactical error." The silence in the room stretched, taut and fragile. Julian, who moments before had been a conquering general, now looked like a schoolboy caught in a lie. "Alistair," he stammered, taking an involuntary step back. We were just having a disagreement. You don't understand." "Oh, I think I understand perfectly," my father said, his voice still unnervingly calm. He took a few steps into the room, his movements deliberate and precise. His eyes flickered to the half-empty wine glasses, the triumphant expressions on Beatrice and Chloe's faces, and then back to me. "Alara," he said gently. "Are you all right?" I could only nod, my hand still pressed to my cheek. "No," he corrected himself softly. "You're not. But you will be." He turned his attention back to the Hayes family. "I've been concerned for some time," he began, addressing the room as if he were briefing his officers. Alara's calls became less frequent. Her stories became vaguer. She started finding excuses to miss holidays. When a sailor goes silent, you start checking the coordinates. You start looking for signs of distress. He gestured to Marcus Thorne, who opened his briefcase on the sleek coffee table. He didn't pull out weapons or photographs. He pulled out a single, neatly typed document. "I had some friends, people who are very good at finding information, look into a few things," my father continued. "It's amazing what you can learn in the digital age. Financial records, for instance." He looked at Julian. "Like how you systematically took Alara's name off joint accounts and moved her personal savings into accounts only you could control. Isolating her financially. A classic first step." Julian's face went white. "And then there are property records," my father went on, his gaze shifting to Beatrice. "This house, for example. It's not in my daughter's name, is it? It's owned by a family trust controlled by you, Beatrice. Making Alara not a homeowner, but a guest. A guest who could be evicted at any time. It ensures she has nothing to fall back on, nowhere to go. Beatrice's composure finally cracked. This is a private family matter. You have no right. When you lay a hand on my daughter, my father said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl, it becomes my right. Marcus Thorne cleared his throat. Julian, he said, his tone professional and cold. As you know, Sterling Price has a very stringent morals clause in its partnership agreements. It covers any conduct that could bring the firm into disrepute. Domestic violence, for example, is explicitly mentioned. You can't prove anything, Julian blustered, but sweat was beading on his forehead. Actually, we can, my father said. He pulled his phone from his pocket. I had a conversation with Arthur Davenport this evening, after he and his lovely wife got home. He was quite disturbed by your behavior at dinner. He found your attempts to silence my daughter unprofessional and, frankly, weak. He was already questioning your leadership potential. This, he gestured to my face, is merely the confirmation. He played a short audio file. It was a recording. My voice, raw and pained, shouting, "It's a cage," followed by the sharp, unmistakable sound of the slap. The new nanny cam Beatrice had installed in the living room has excellent audio quality, my father noted conversationally. A gift, I believe, that will keep on giving. A copy of this recording, along with a detailed summary of your financial and emotional abuse of my daughter, has already been sent to Arthur Davenport's personal email. He's convening an emergency board meeting in the morning. I suspect your career at Sterling Price is over. Julian looked as though he might collapse. Chloe was staring at my father, her face a mask of disbelief and fear. And Beatrice, my father said, turning his piercing gaze on her. Your position as the head of the city's most prestigious hospital charity gala? It's a position that requires a person of unimpeachable character. I wonder how the other board members will feel when they learn you not only witnessed, but encouraged an act of violence. Reputations like fine crystal are so easily shattered. He let that sink in before turning to me. His entire demeanor softened. The captain was gone, and in his place was just my dad. Alara, he said, holding out his hand. I packed a bag for you this afternoon. Your favorite sweaters, your nursing journals, your running shoes. It's in my car, along with your grandmother's quilt. I had a friend retrieve it from the local dump a few months ago. I had it professionally cleaned. It's waiting for you. Tears streamed down my face, but this time, they were tears of overwhelming relief and a love so pure it ached. He had known. He had been watching over me all along, waiting for me to be ready. I didn't hesitate. I walked past the ruins of my marriage, past the 3 people whose cruelty had almost extinguished my light, and I took my father's hand. The strength in his grip was the surest thing I had felt in 3 years. You can't just leave. Julian cried out, a desperate, pathetic sound. Alara, please. I'm sorry. I love you. I stopped at the door and looked back at him, at the man I had once loved, now rendered small and powerless by his own actions. No, Julian, I said, my voice steady and clear for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. You don't love me. You love the idea of me. You love the control you had over me. What you did tonight, that wasn't a mistake. It was a revelation. You showed me exactly who you are. And my father, I glanced at the strong, quiet man beside me, just reminded me of who I am. Then I walked out of that beautiful, cold house, leaving the darkness behind me, and stepped into the clean, salty air of my own future. 1 year later, the conference room at Evergreen Community Hospital was bright with afternoon sun. I stood at the podium, looking out at a sea of faces, nurses, doctors, social workers. The nameplate in front of me read, Alara Finch, Pediatric Patient Advocacy Supervisor. It was a position I had created, a program I had built from the ground up, funded by a generous grant from the Davenport Foundation, chaired by none other than Eleanor Davenport, who had become a fierce mentor and a dear friend. Advocacy isn't just about speaking for those who can't, I was saying, my voice confident and sure. It's about teaching them to find their own voice. It's about creating an environment where they feel safe enough to use it. Our job is to hand them the microphone, not to speak for them. After the presentation, a young resident with nervous eyes and a hesitant smile approached me. "Miss Finch? That was really inspiring. I have a friend who's in a difficult situation at home. I didn't know how to help her, but now I think I have some ideas." "My door is always open," I told her, handing her my card. "For you or for your friend. No one has to go through it alone." As she walked away, my phone buzzed. It was an email with the subject line, "An apology I don't deserve to make." It was from Chloe. I hesitated, then opened it. The cool, sophisticated girl I remembered was gone. In her place were the words of a woman who was slowly, painfully, examining the wreckage of her life. She wrote about therapy, about learning the term enabler, about the shame she felt for her silence and her complicity. Her engagement had ended. Her social circle had evaporated. For the first time, she wrote, she was being forced to look at who she was without the protective armor of her family's name and money. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she concluded. "I wouldn't, if I were you. But I wanted you to know that seeing you walk out of that house with your head held high, it planted a seed. It made me realize that courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about doing the right thing even when you are. I hope you are happy, Alara. You earned it." I closed the email without responding. Her journey was her own. But I felt a strange, quiet sense of peace. The ripples from that one night were still spreading, changing the tides in lives I would never touch. Later that evening, I sat in the armchair of my own apartment. It was a small, cozy space above a bookstore, filled with mismatched furniture, thriving plants, and shelves, strong, solid wood shelves I had built myself, overflowing with books. My grandmother's quilt was draped over the sofa, its familiar patterns a map of resilience and love. My father was coming over for dinner. I was making his favorite, a simple fish stew that smelled of the sea. The life I was living now wasn't grand or glamorous. It was quiet. It was real. It was mine. There was a knock on the door. It was Dad, holding a bottle of wine and a small, potted hydrangea. "Thought your collection looked a little incomplete," he said with a small smile. We sat and talked for hours, the easy, comfortable conversation of two people who understood each other without needing many words. He told me about his new volunteer gig, teaching celestial navigation to at-risk youth. I told him about Leo, the little boy who had rung the chemo bell, who had just celebrated his first cancer-free birthday. As he was leaving, he paused in the doorway. "I'm proud of you, Alara," he said, his eyes shining. "Not for surviving, but for the way you've chosen to live." After he left, I stood by my window, looking down at the streetlights painting the wet pavement gold. For a long time after leaving Julian, I thought my story was about a great escape. But I had come to realize it wasn't about the leaving. It was about the arriving. Arriving back at myself. I was not the broken woman who had been slapped in a pristine living room. I was not the ghost who had haunted a loveless marriage. I was Alara Finch. A daughter, a healer, a leader. A woman who had navigated through the darkest of storms and found her way back to her own shore. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt the steady, quiet, unshakable strength of my own heart, charting a course toward a future that was lit by my own light.